Pastor Martin struck a note when he said that he had his first couple sermons or whatever, and he ran through 3 of them in 10 minutes, and that's kind of how I feel tonight. I'm no speaker. I'm just here to tell you my story, and I'm wondering what this cowbell's for. Okay. All right, so I want to thank Pastor McGill for inviting me here. I don't feel real comfortable talking about myself, but I owe it to God to share my story, my testimony for what all He's done for me. I give God all the credit for everything I've ever done, and I wouldn't be standing here if it wasn't for Him. So I was born and raised in Wilkes County, North Carolina, to a Jehovah's Witness mother and a father who didn't attend church. Needless to say, I didn't really grow up in a Christian household. I went to church once in elementary school with my cousin, Derek Holland. We went to like vacation Bible school, and we got in a big fight. And so that was kind of my experience with it, and I really didn't go back after that. He was picking on my cousin, so I had to take care of him. So I spent my time in high school playing football and baseball and going out drinking and hanging out with my friends, and God really wasn't on my mind because I didn't know much about Him. After graduating high school, I wasn't thinking about going to college either. The military was calling, though, and not having a whole lot of options. You know, I grew up in the mountains of North Carolina, and wasn't a whole lot going on there. I decided to join the Navy to be a SEAL. My thinking was, if you're going to go into the military and possibly to war, you might as well go with the toughest outfit you can get into. And so the problem was the swimming part. There's not a lot of swim teams in the mountains of North Carolina. So, I'd swim in the creek, but that really didn't count, And so, but I did have a buddy, Andy Pierce. He had a swimming pool behind his house, and so I'd go over to Andy's house, and man, he'd teach me how to swim. So not much of a resume for going to be a Navy SEAL, but it worked. So 2 weeks after I graduated high school, I left home and I reported for Navy basic training in Orlando, Florida. Completed basic training, headed to A school, which was a photographer's mate. It was the shortest one I could find. My recruiter told me that I needed to have a school so when I quit SEAL training that I could fall back on that, and when I went in the real Navy. And so arrived in San Diego to Bud's basic underwater demolition SEAL training in the fall of 1988. And at the worst possible time you can get there. It was about October, and we were getting ready to class up, and so that put me in a winter class, class 160. It was freezing temperatures, icy waters, and I had never prayed much before that, and I didn't really know how, but I sure gave it a shot there. Every day was a blessing to be alive and to still be in the class. I mean, I'm just a hillbilly from North Carolina, and I mean, people were dropping like flies, but if you just hung on, you could make it through it. And so 80 of us started and 8 of us graduated the next July of '89. So we were such a small class. They sent a new team was being built, and it was SEAL Team 8 in Little Creek, Virginia. So they sent my whole class to SEAL Team 8. Soon after arriving, my platoon deployed on a Mediterranean cruise straight into Desert Storm. Our focus was deep reconnaissance missions in northern Iraq and sniper missions. One particular mission I'll tell you about, I was requested by my platoon leader to reconnoiter an enemy position. It's about 4 Ks from our position. And he comes up to me and he's like, "Hey, do you think you can get over into that it looked like a tent, and they were carrying stuff in and out of this tent, and we couldn't really tell what it was. We had spotting scopes, and we was really looking, and we just couldn't tell what they had, And he's like, "Do you think you could get over and see what's in that?" And I said, "By myself?" And he's like, "Well, he knew I was pretty sneaky, you know. I mean, I grew up hunting and fishing, and so, and I said, well, I mean, he goes, well, if you could take somebody else, and he said, and I said, well, I don't know, I would probably get caught if I had somebody with me. So I put a pistol belt on and had my pistol and 4 grenades, and one of them was a Willie Pete, and so I could mark my position so they could shoot at it if I got in trouble. And then I had a survival radio and a quart canteen, and so I eased off that evening right after dark, and this was before night vision, and eased over there and made it all the way to that tent, looked in it, and it was just rice and RPGs and AK-47s and nothing real fancy, and so I headed back. But I got caught halfway back. It was daylight hit, and there was enemy positions all the way over toward this place. So I had to bury myself in a crack in the rocks, and with rocks and sand and dirt and everything. And so I'm out of water by this time, and I ain't got no food, and I'm out of shade. And so it's kind of a bad deal, you know. I mean, it's 100 degrees, and you know, and you're holed up, you know, right out in the sun, you know, in the middle of the day for a whole day. So I was stuck out there till it got dark. Well, then I eased on out. There's ants biting me, and I was having to fight snakes off, and anyway, so I made it back to the position that night, and I got in there and told him what was in there, and I did tell him, I said, I'm not doing that again. So, I mean, I was 20 years old when that was happening. I was in the mountains, I was surrounded by the enemy, and I was scared, and I prayed. Like I said, I don't know much about it, but I knew there's something out there, and so I prayed. I survived that day, and I described this event in such detail, just this one event, and I'll do one more. But because of the time, I was far from being saved, okay? So I returned from Desert Storm and was asked to interview for the Naval Special Warfare Development Group. It's the Navy's counterterrorism unit. They only recruit the top 1% of the SEALs in the Navy. And I was accepted. I began the 8-month training program. We began with 36 and finished with 20 of us. And I was assigned to a team. We conducted missions and training all over the world. I was never home, and I had a wife and a child, and I was tired of being gone. So in 1995, I separated from the Navy. I began working with my father up in Hickory, North Carolina. He was in the textiles. He owned a hosiery mill, small hosiery mill. And so I started working with him right after I got out of the Navy. My cousin, the same one that I'd been to church with when we were kids, he worked there as well, okay? So it was back-breaking work, and we both had other plans to do something else. He was going to seminary, and I had applied to be a wildlife officer here in North Carolina. He was always asking me to come to church for some reason that I couldn't understand why it was so important to him. But he was always, you know, it's like every other day, he's like, hey, you know, why don't you come to church? Why don't you come to church? And I was like, you know, I was like, no, I'm not, I don't go to church, you know, and so I couldn't understand it, but he had grown up in a similar situation to mine. His mother was a Jehovah's Witness, and he was in a broken home, and so he knew I didn't know Christ. And so at the time, you know, I just kept putting him off, and I put him off for a year or so, saying, you know, church wasn't for me, made me uncomfortable. And I was remembering the last time I went to church with him. So one day he told me he was running for the pastor of a church that's about 4 miles from where I grew up, and I still lived in that area. And he said, you ought to come listen to me preach. And I was like, well, no, I don't know. I've never been. I don't want to go. And he's like, well, he goes, I'm in the running for getting that church. There's about 6 other pastors and me. They're talking about, you know, giving the church to. So I'm thinking, okay, well, I've heard about this church, and there's a bunch of old people in there, and they don't really like change, and you know, and this, that, and the other thing. So I'm thinking I'm pretty safe if I make a deal with him. So he'd be quiet. I said, look, if you get that church, I'll come listen to you preach. So I felt pretty safe with my decision. So guess who got the job? Cousin Derek. So Derek came to work especially cheerful the next week and gave me the great news. And so, well, now I got to keep my end of the bargain up. And I went home to tell my wife the situation. Well, she was raised a Catholic, and neither of us were too excited to be headed to a Baptist church. Never been to one, but a deal's a deal. And so I packed up the wife and headed to church the next Sunday. From the first service, God was all over me. I mean, my cousin had to make a deal with me to get me to even come to the church. And it's the first time I'm in this church, and I'm wanting to go to the altar. So I'm like, hey, I was glad the service ended because I didn't want to make a fool out of myself and almost ran out the door, you know. So I got out of there. But boy, I'll tell you, I was on the way home. I looked over at my wife and I said, "What'd you think of that?" And she goes, "Well, I love that service, you know." And so we couldn't wait to get back. And of course, I kept it on the down low from Derek at work about how much it affected me, you know. And so after denying the urge to kneel for about 6 months, finally, one day I made the walk. I don't even remember really walking down there. It was like I was floating down there almost, and it was like I was being carried. And once there, I prayed with Pastor Derek to accept Christ, and I never felt a greater joy in my whole life. I mean, I just felt so... I was crying, and I was just letting it all go, and I didn't care who saw it. And I mean, I didn't even know these people that good, you know, and didn't care. I've never cried in front of nobody, you know, hardly, you know, and it didn't matter, you know. So and I knew it was real, and I'd found what I was searching for. So I was baptized that same year, and then my wife and children were saved that year. So that was the biggest blessing, because once I was saved, you know, how do you, you know, and you just try to be an example to them, and it brought them to Christ, you know. And so I was so happy about that. I soon began praying and seeking God, knowing now my prayers were being answered, whereas before I didn't even know where they were going. So it's a really good feeling, you know, to know that. There was an answered prayer that next spring when I was hired as a wildlife officer for North Carolina. Once again, another set of training, 20 weeks down in Chapel Hill and Salemburg, North Carolina. 25 of us started and 14 of us graduated. I was sent off to Henderson County for my training, and I was there for 6 months, and then I went to Troy, North Carolina, in Montgomery County for 3 years. My home county, Wilkes County, came open in 2000. The guy that had been there for 30 years had retired. And so I put in for the job, prayed about it, and I got the job. So got my home county back. It's 2000. Just everything's great. Okay? So I've been in Wilkes County for about a year. Found a good church. Everything was going good. And then September 11th, 2001 happens. So I couldn't sleep, and I knew this was going to be the event of my lifetime. It was my generation's Pearl Harbor. Everyone wanted to do something to help the country and the survivors of this cowardly attack. In my case, I'd been trained at the highest levels to deal with just this type of evil. So within a week, I called my friend at my old Navy unit and told him I was wanting to come back. And so he spoke with the command master chief, and he said they were willing to take a look at me, but I needed to do a regular SEAL platoon and work up in a deployment with them before I could come back to a development group. And I knew, though, I'd been in that development group before, I knew where the tip of the spear was at and who was going to be sent first, and it was going to be them. And so I didn't really like the thoughts of that. My friend, he suggested another path. He said that he was one of the 4 SEALs, and I remember him going with the Special Mission Unit in the Army. that was in the Battle of the Black Sea in Mogadishu in 1993, as portrayed in that movie Black Hawk Down. He was very impressed with that unit that he was with, the special operators there, and he said, well, they're already in Afghanistan. So he advised me that anyone can try out for that unit, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. And he said he would have done it back in 1994, but the Navy threatened to kick him out if he went and tried out for them. That's kind of how it was back then, so he stayed where he was at. He told me, he said it was just what they told him was just like a little compass course in the woods or something. And I thought, well, shucks, I'm pretty good in the woods. He said, yeah, it wouldn't be no problem for you. And I thought it sounded a little too good to be true. But he gave me the number to the recruiter. So they said, send me a resume. And I didn't even have a resume, so I scrabbled one together by hand and sent it to them. And then they said, well, come take a PT test. And that's physical training. And so I went down there and I stayed in good shape while I was out, so I did good on that. And they're like, all right, well, we're going to cut you some orders for this spring. And so I had to take work off as a game warden to go to this selection, okay? The selection, just the initial selection into this unit was a month long. It was a miserable month, and we walked about 350 to 400 miles carrying a big heavy pack and a rifle with a rubber rifle with no sling. It weighed about 10 pounds. It rained. It was in the spring of '02, and it rained every day, I guess, in West Virginia. And then one morning I woke up, kind of threw everything off because I was suffocating, and I had like 8 inches of snow on my face where my hooch had fell in on me and thought I was dying. So this was the initial tryout, basically, for the most elite unit on the planet for counterterrorism. So it was much more than a little compass course in the woods, and I let my buddy know when I got back. So I prayed every day for God to help me to make the right decisions and keep me out of that mountain laurel, because West Virginia mountain laurel, you can't even see the sky if you get in it. So you got to stay out of that, and he did. That course, it went from 40,000 applications to 120 of us going to West Virginia and 16 of us graduating. And that's just the beginning of it. 8 months, there would be only 8 of us left once we got to that unit. And once again, God got me through that. I was assigned to an operational squadron. Oddly enough, it was the same squadron that my buddy from Dev Group was with in Somalia and Mogadishu. Within 4 months, we were sneaking across the border into Iraq during the invasion. We were hitting targets that were suspected to contain weapons of mass destruction and basically getting in firefights all the way across western Iraq. It was the longest desert mobility mission since World War II, 1,500 miles, in thin-skinned vehicles, open vehicles. And there were 60 of us. We were outnumbered and outgunned in every battle with no armor, but God watched over us. I had a good friend die on that mission, and then I had a lot of guys get wounded, but we survived and came home. After that, we went back over a few months later after returning home, and our mission had changed in 2003 to become kill or capture high-value targets. I'm sure you remember the infamous deck of cards with Saddam's henchmen on it. We would go out at night, sometimes twice, 3 times a night, looking for these people. And I'd pray every night. I'd pray that we would find these people to wipe them out, because they were just pure evil. Our unit captured or killed almost that entire deck of cards, including the ace of spades, Saddam Hussein. So prayer works, and it worked. All right, so fast forward to 2011. I've conducted over 1,500 combat missions, deploying at least twice a year now. for months on end. I was so focused on fighting and the war, and I basically let my family slip away. And even worse, God wasn't the center of my life. I still prayed before the missions for God to forgive me, take care of my family, and for our safety as we did the mission. But my focus was to go kill bad guys and my own selfish desires. I'd gotten so used to the killing that it was like another day at the office. March 2011, we were in northern Afghanistan near Kunduz with the mission to kill or capture foreign fighters coming across the border, the Uzbekistan border. They would come across 20 strong, armed to the teeth, paid by Al-Qaeda to come into Afghanistan to kill anyone that disagreed with them, with the ultimate goal to engage U.S. troops. They would take over a couple of houses in a village. This was really the part that really bothered me about these people. They would rape the male children and kill anyone in the village that had a problem with it. Each night they would move further into Afghanistan and repeat this same process. We would find these patrols on surveillance, and then when they'd get snug in their looted houses, we'd swoop in and kill them. On one of these missions, a group of 12 fighters had taken over a house, and they put 2 guys out in the bush to keep watch. My team's mission, we were inserted on MH6s. You flew OH6s, but that's where my team was inserted on that most of the time, on the rooftops or in the brush. But so we were inserted in to take care of that security team. As we were coming into the target, we took fire and we killed one of the guys. The other guy disappeared. And so once we got out of the helicopter, we started moving toward that location. We found the first guy that we killed, and the surveillance was telling us that the other guy was around the side of the house that was in front of us, out into the brush, about 200 yards out in front of us. There was an open gate. I kind of poked my head around the house, and I saw an open gate, and I saw where they were saying he was at, so I went back and got my team. We came around the side of the house. One of my guys was going along the side of the wall, and I was swinging wide. The house was about 20 yards to my right front. There was a big old hole of water, like a spring-fed, irrigation pool or something right there, but it wasn't frozen. It was 25 degrees, so it had to have been a spring or something. It was really cold that night. We rounded the side of that house, and I had my gun up on the gate where they said the guy was just outside that gate, the surveillance. And as I moved around that water, I was thinking to myself, I said, ooh, boy, I'd hate to fall in that tonight. It's cold, And right as I broke around the end of that water, that guy steps out of that house. And for some reason, I was on that gate, but I turned and faced him. And right as I turned to face him, he opened up with a PKM machine gun. A PKM machine gun is it's like an automatic 30-06. It's a belt-fed weapon. We call it a people-killing machine. It doesn't stand for that in Russian, whatever that is in Russian, but we call it a people-killing machine because it's a devastating weapon. And then most people don't survive, getting shot from 800 yards, and I'm 20 yards from this guy. And so he's firing when I turn on him, and he starts shooting my equipment off, shoots my night vision goggles off, shoots my radio in half. A round goes off the front of my armor, and then a round goes into my chest, right above my heart, goes out my shoulder blade. So that paralyzes my left arm, and I can't raise my weapon because my sling's under my arm, and so I'm trying to raise my weapon, but he's still shooting me, and he's just firing, and he's following me. So I just took a couple steps and just dove into that hole of water. He's still firing into that hole of water, and I'm hearing the dirt. It's hitting the dirt. It's hitting the water, and I'm laying there underwater. And thank goodness for my SEAL training here. I'm laying there under that water, and I'm thinking, well, and I'm not scared. I'm like, well, I guess this is it, and but I'm saved, and so that's the key, so I'm pretty calm about the whole thing, I'm like, well, people say your life flashes before your eyes and all that, and it really didn't happen that way. I'm like, well, I guess this is it. I'm going to be here, and this is the end. But if he'll quit shooting at me, I'm going to ease up out of here and shoot back, if I get a chance, and if I'm not dead here in a minute. And so, and I was waiting and waiting, and he finally quit shooting, and I thought to myself, I'm still alive. I said, well, if I live through this, this is going to ruin my bow season because I bow hunt a lot, and so I'm laying there and I'm still alive. So I said, well, I came up out of that water and I'm starting to get the move around and put my gun up on the little berm, and he starts shooting again. So I kind of ease back down, but he's not shooting at me, he's shooting at my team now. He's moved around the side of the building. He's got that PK stuck around the side of the building, and he's unloading another belt into the team. So I just laid my weapon up on the little berm there as far as I could get it, and I start shooting at his muzzle blast. So he's taking pretty effective fire now because stuff's, I guess, flying off the walls around him, and he knows that somebody's shooting at him close, So he quits firing, and the only thing he knows to do now is run. Well, he's running right toward me. So I'm now, I can't raise my weapon. I'm sitting up at this time. I'm sitting in this hole of water almost neck deep. And so I'm trying to get up to where I can shoot him as he comes by me, or as he comes up to shoot me. And as he's coming by, all I can do is raise my weapon, and I'm shooting at his feet as he's coming by, as I'm sloshing around and turning in the water. He falls down and almost drops his PK on top of me, and then I just can't get him, and he kind of gets up and hobbles on out the gate and goes into a neighbor's house. The Rangers capture him later that night. He was in there trying to act like he was one of the family members, but he had a hole in his foot, and that didn't really fly. So they ended up dragging him out of there, and I think they ended up hanging him. I don't know for sure. Let's see. So they get me up, and I'm not feeling too bad, I should be dead because, I'm shot through the chest, and the docs are like, how are you feeling, and I'm like, well, I'm pretty good, and they're like, how's your breathing, and I'm like, and I know what they were wanting. He had a needle, like holding down by his side there, and he's like, how's your breathing, and I'm like, that's good, it's good, because he's wanting to stick that needle in my chest, and relieve some pressure. And so I'm like, no, I'm good. And so I ended up just slung my arm, and I walked out about 2 kilometers to the medevac. They medevaced me out of there, and that was it. I headed to Bagram, Germany, and then it's Walter Reed. I was in the hospital for about a month. The docs let me go home. They had to replace my collarbone. It was in 1,000,000 pieces. They put titanium in there. My family was gone. I was staying at a friend's empty house. My left arm was paralyzed and useless. I was on pain medicine. It was a very dark time for me. I really didn't have a lot. I was wondering why God had saved me for this, And I prayed and I asked for his help and forgiveness. And he sent an angel to take care of me. And she's been with me ever since. So they sent me up to the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota to a neurosurgeon. And I was wanting to know, because I couldn't really raise my arm. And I was wanting to know, hey, what's the chances that I can raise my arm again, And the docs told me, he goes, well, for one thing, it's a miracle you're alive. Because the bullet entered just below my collarbone, shattered my collarbone into 1,000,000 pieces, and razor-sharp bone fragments. And if either one of them would have nicked my brachial artery or carotid artery, which it moved, both of them, to get through and go out my shoulder blade, then I would have just bled to death in that water, because I was in that water for about 10 to 15 minutes. So there would have been no survival. And so the doctor's like, I just don't understand why you're alive, for one thing. And another thing is, he says, we don't have a lot of data on that wound. Most people die from that wound, almost everyone. I said, all right, well, thanks. I said, well, is my arm ever going to work again? And he's like, Now, this is a neurosurgeon at the Mayo Clinic. He said, I'll tell you what, he goes, that's just God stuff. He goes, it's so complicated. And I can't even believe this man's telling me this. I thought he was going to say, oh, yeah, we can go in there and put it back together and all this, that, and the other thing. He goes, it's so complicated, we can't even really explain how it works. He goes, so you kind of got what you got. And so basically, after that, it was up to God. I mean, whether I could be able to raise this arm. But I'll tell you, so I rehabbed for 2 years. And my arm got stronger each day. Retired from the Army in 2013. I've since deployed back to Afghanistan 4 more times, and I've conducted about 200 more missions for the U.S. government. I'll tell you, I've truly been blessed in my life. In 2014, I married that angel that came and saved me, and we are members of a wonderful church back in Wilkes County, Pilgrim Baptist, and I have a son who's an Army Ranger who has completed safe deployments to both Iraq and Afghanistan. And I had the honor and privilege to conduct a few missions with him last year in Afghanistan. I have a wonderful daughter who's a graduate of Indiana University, and she's a journalist down in Wilmington, North Carolina. And we have 2 daughters and a son at home now. And they're all saved. In closing, I'd like to take you guys to take a couple things away from this tonight. And that's the pastor's convention, and this is why I want you to take this away. All right, so when you have a sheep that's astray, never turn your back on him. Never give up on him, because God does not give up on that sheep. Every member of your flock is precious, and it may take some wrangling to drag them back into the fold, but his life's worth it, and it's worth it in the eyes of the Lord too. Didn't God give his son's life for that sheep, and how can we do less? The second thing is, when I was a SEAL, I prayed because I was afraid. But once God saved me, I prayed because he loved me and loved me enough to die for me. And I was promised a place in heaven when this life's over. So he was worthy. Every day I pray to God because of that. And so my question to you is, what are you afraid of? The answer should be nothing. Absolutely nothing. Nothing and no one, because God has your back through thick and thin. No powers or principalities, nothing in this life or the next. Because if you really believe that you're saved by God's grace, then you're free. I am living proof. Thank you for your time this evening, and God bless you and God bless America.